This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
Welcome to today's Talk Business and Politics Daily. I'm joined by Rex Nelson and Richard Bearden, two folks who remember fondly the late Congressman J. Dickey. Rex, you covered J. Dickey up in Washington, D.C. during your Democrat Gazette days, as well as through Republican politics. Richard, you worked with him as a candidate and then went to work for him on his staff in a couple of different respects. So tell me a little bit. I just want some stories, guys. This is just here to remember some fond times, and I will begin with you, Rex. Your favorite J. Dickey story.
Jay was a character, as we all know, with a capital C, and he would never let you forget things. I mean, if I ever heard this story once, I heard it 200 times, and it goes back to when he first announced, Richard, in 1992 that he was going to run for Congress. I happened to be speaking to the Pine Bluff Rotary Club. And so as I spoke, this was before, to take everybody back a minute, this was before the check kiting scandal hit in the House. And so nobody dreamed that Burl Anthony Jr., who got caught up in that, would lose to Bill McEwen in the Democratic primary. So Burl just seemed unbeatable at the point. So as I was speaking, I said, look, I'm glad J. Dickey is running for Congress. We need competition in all four of our congressional districts in Arkansas. And then I made the mistake of saying, but I've got to tell you, I was born and raised in the 4th Congressional District of Arkansas, and I will never live to see a Republican member elected from the 4th District. Well, for the next 20 years, of course, Jay reminded me of that every time he would run into me. He'd say, you remember that speech you gave at the Pine Bluff Rotary Club? I said, yeah, Jay, you've only reminded me about 200 times about that. He loved bringing that up.
Did you help recruit him for that?
Yeah. And funny, because he was from Pine Bluff, people would call and they'd say, boy, J. Dickey's crazy for running for Congress. And this people say, J. Dickey might just be crazy. But, you know, he was a character. And 100 funny stories about him. I will tell you, though, I think that what gets overshadowed is all the funny stories about J. Dickey are really the hard work he did. And I was talking with Princey Hickerson, former chairman of the Highway Commission, and she said, you know, on her tenure on the Highway Commission, she said J. Dickey brought in tens of millions of dollars that were never really blasted out in news articles in areas that had never gotten a dime in highway funding. And again, you know, there's the story of Rami the dog that drove the truck into the radio station. There's so many J. Dickey stories. But again, I think, as you remember, Jay, with all those funny stories, he did do a tremendous amount for Arkansas as congressman in his position on the Appropriations Commission, and a tremendous amount for South Arkansas. And I think, you know, that's really going to be his lasting legacy.
Yeah, back when we were still doing congressional earmarks, he was the king of earmarks, and it basically was, he would bug senior members of the House and Senate so much of the Appropriations Committees that they'd finally say enough. I mean, Trent Lott said that. You can find a quote from him saying, we just wanted to make Dickey go away. So, for instance, now, as you're driving through Pine Bluff, you can get off the interstate there and take this road through the middle of nowhere that ends outside of Star City. One of these days, I don't think it'll be in my lifetime, but that will be the 4-lane connector from Pine Bluff to the new Interstate 69 down in southeast Arkansas. That was a J. Dickey earmark, for instance, that new highway, the way that I now take to Monticello when I'm driving to Little Rock.
And I'll tell you, just as a side story, that he sat, I think, a full day, 7-8 hours outside the Speaker's office, the anteroom, waiting for Speaker Gingrich to come out and meet with him. And finally, I think every time the door opened, you know, the secretary would say, Congressman Dickey, the Speaker is aware you're here. I don't know other members that would have sat 6-7 hours for the opportunity to go in and see the Speaker and just say, I need your help on this project. And, you know, the Speaker finally relented and said, if it'll make you go away, I'll help you get the money.
What was it like covering him in there? I mean, how he was obviously very accessible, but I mean, just did you ever dread writing something about him? Did you ever?
Well, you knew you were going to get a call, regardless of whether it was positive or negative. I mean, Jay was going to analyze everything you wrote, but he always did it in a good spirit, good-natured. I mean, he was not a man to hold grudges, which was nice. And I'll go back to what Richard said. As a guy who was born and raised there in Pine Bluff, he truly loved South Arkansas, and he wanted to do what was best for that district. That district now almost goes to Fayetteville, of course.
Right.
But back then it was more of the South Arkansas district, and he had a real love for that part of the state.
And tell me, what was it like working for him as a staffer? Because you were his district director and you were his chief of staff at one time.
Well, never a dull day. Jay had a tendency to go through staff people, but he remained friends with them even after they had, for whatever reasons, departed. So, earlier this week, reminisced with a number of former staffers. Looked up last Friday, there was Bob Brooks, who succeeded me as chief of staff, and Mitchell Lowe, who was his driver. But again, to Rex's point, the man loved Pine Bluff. I mean, I have seen few people that had an absolute love and passion for Pine Bluff. And whether it was UAPB, the work he helped spearhead getting some money for the stadium to kickstart it off. And again, he was relentless. I think he wore out CEOs across the state because it was important to him, if something was going on in Pine Bluff, that he get engaged. And so again, never a dull moment. This was a guy on Saturdays would get up and travel his district. And whether it was a 5K race somewhere and you ended at a pancake supper, or pancake breakfast and then on to a fish fry at the end of the day, we would sometimes drive, 200-300 miles on a Saturday, starting in Pine Bluff and ending in Texarkana.
Well, the joke used to be if there were 3 people gathered in South Arkansas,
there
one of them was
Jay
Dickey.
Yeah,
for sure. Tell me one funny story that you recall.
I have to tell one Dickeyism that I particularly remember, and I remember it so well for some reason. I remember where I was. I was driving from Little Rock to Conway to tape the Arkansas Week program on the Arkansas Educational Television Network. So it was on a Friday morning, and I had on a talk show in Little Rock, and Jay was the guest on the talk show. And he was talking about the cost of Medicaid and Medicare, and he was making the point that he thought doctors were giving a bunch of unnecessary tests and they were really bilking the system and that we needed to tighten down on that. So his line was, he said, you might go in for just a headache and they end up giving you a C-SPAN or something. A C-SPAN or something? That must be between a CAT scan and a C-section somehow. I could not wait to get into the studios and tell my colleagues about that comment, a C-SPAN.
Too funny. All right, keep it PG rated.
Favorite Jay Dickey story. Again, 2 or 3 people gathered. Jay was there. He was notorious for wanting to be the last person to leave. So we had a full day. He was campaigning against Jay Bradford, who had challenged him the second year. So we were full Saturday all across the spectrum. Rex well knows where the Emerson Pea Festival, Black-Eyed
Purple Oil Pea
Festival,
and World Championship motorized tiller races.
Right.
So because Jay had chatted, we're running late. We get there's a very small parade, and we were the last car in. And again, we're terribly late to the event because we'd been so many other places. We just rolled through in a Jay's SUV, and we just kind of slapped a Jay Dickey sign out on each end. Jay waves, and we get to the end of the parade. He goes, "Head on to Texarkana." So it was probably the shortest event he'd ever been to. But by golly, we'd checked off that day. We'd been to Emerson.
And never stopped at the end of the parade.
We never stopped. Driving. It was a slow roll as we head out of
from
town.
20 to 60. All right. Rex Nelson, Richard Bearden, thank you so much for sharing, and we'll have fond memories of Jay Dickey for many years to come.
We will.
All right. We're back with more right after this.
Arkansas Electric Cooperative Corporation provides electric energy across 2/3 of Arkansas. This is an exciting time in our energy history, with incredible progress being made in renewable energy and storage technologies. As our energy portfolio continues to diversify, we'll maintain an all-the-above strategy to provide reliable and affordable electricity. Ever since the first light bulbs were placed in our members' homes, the electric cooperatives have been the solutions provider for our members, and we want to continue that well into the future.
Each day, the promise of our nation begins again. Arkansas and America, moving forward. I help make that promise a reality. It's not for everyone, but people everywhere depend on us.
Oh, I love you too, sweetie.
Trucking delivers, or everything stops. And that's what drives me.
I did.
Time now to go inside the numbers for a look at the latest jobless numbers in Arkansas. Inside the Numbers is brought to you by the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce and Associated Industries of Arkansas. March was a record month for Arkansas employment, and that's saying something since we've had several record months in the last year. First, the March jobless rate in Arkansas hit a record low of 3.6%. We've had several months at 3.7%, but 3.6% is a brand new low, and That's something to brag about. A year ago, the unemployment rate in Arkansas was 4.1%. Moving to the winners and losers in terms of sector gains and losses, more good news. The number is 7,000. Education and health services actually posted big gains over the past year. A whopping 7,000 new jobs were added to that sector in the last 12 months. The majority of those job gains were in the healthcare industry. On the downside, not necessarily a bad thing, negative 2,100. That's the number of job losses we've seen over the past year in the government sector. And most of those job losses have been in state and local government employment. You can keep up with numbers like these each and every day on our website at talkbusiness.net. That's all for today's program. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.